This concept of interrupting self-deception is very interesting to me. Interrupting self-deception is in our desire to want to interrupt other people, to influence them, to change the world, to make the world better. We're wanting to interrupt the status quo. We're wanting to interrupt the way things are done. We're wanting to interrupt the way that people think and feel and do things by default. We're being interrupted all the time by technology, by life, by the climate, by our bodies, by each other. This idea of aging and growing and changing, it's a constant interruption. In my view, our ability to be with interruption, to accept it, to love it, to embrace it, to roll with it, I think is incredibly important, which will govern our experience of life in the way that we deal with challenge and change and uncertainty. Trying to create a life where everything's predictable and everything's certain, everything's guaranteed and everything's safe sounds very attractive and sounds very appealing if you are someone who doesn't know how to basically survive challenge and change and uncertainty. However, it's going to happen anyway. While you can fight off all these things the very best you can't stop it. And life is going to change and things are going to happen and there's going to be uncertainty. You're going to be interrupted and it's going to get uncomfortable at times. What I'm wanting to create out of this is I'm just wanting to find the people in the world who are willing to accept that and are willing to develop themselves in a way that they can become fearless. Fearless in the sense of they can show up for anything and trust that they will be okay no matter what. And if you're not okay, then you're not okay. There's a bug. It's not very Buddhist of me. So this subject of self-deception is very interesting to me because as we want to influence and help other people, we're ultimately going to come up against their levels of self-deception, their distortions, their personal experiences, their biases. It's the story of the allegory of the cave, where you've got all these men sitting in a cave and all they can see is a shadow on the wall, and they're all trying to speculate what's happening outside. All of them are technically correct from the perspective that they're sitting in, and yet none of them necessarily have the whole picture. And so there's this idea in life that as we go through looking through the lens of our own experience, we understand life from our own position. And empathy is this idea of how do we actually try to attempt to understand another person's perspective through their eyes while also being trapped inside our own. True empathy, I think, is actually really quite difficult for this very reason, because we are attempting to try to relate and experience life as someone else while only really having our own experience of life to go by. So true empathy is actually really quite difficult. And it's quite difficult because we just don't know often how to get out of our own experience while attempting to be objective about another person. This is why empathy is more than just positive words or holding safe space or saying nice things or trying to look empathetic or sound empathetic. The bigger question is, in this particular moment, could you genuinely truly see the world through the eyes of someone that you really, really don't like, really, really hate, really, really detest, and do so objectively? Or would you have the bias of being you through the person's eyes? I think empathy is an incredibly difficult thing to do because it's just so automatic for us to be in our own mind and our own bodies and our own context. So attempting to try to understand what it might be like to be a woman or to be of a different culture or religion or age group or grow up in a different era or in a different profession or in a different social position in the hierarchy, whatever it might be, at best, we're going to be able to try and speculate what it might be like while still basically being grounded in the experience of our own body. So part of the self-deception is we are wanting to interrupt other people. The point of influencing, the point of leadership is to try to interrupt other people in their own self-deceptions, in their own distortions, in their own patterns, in their own beliefs. There's no shortage of content on the internet talking about why people are stuck and all they've got to do and all they've got to think and all they've got to say and feel and practice, and then everything would be magical. And many people still don't see that a lot of that advice, though well-intentioned in a polished framework, is still coming from the context of another person who experiences life a certain way. I think this is why so many people get upset about privilege. They get upset about men versus women or color or race or gender. Is because, well, until you've actually fully been in that particular person's situation, you may at best have an intellectual understanding of it. And even to women or to Christians or Catholics or Buddhists or Muslims or whatever like that would still have a completely different experience of the similar context. So this is part of this ongoing predicament where we understand in life that we all are kind of little special snowflakes, and yet we're also so similar at the same time. It's one of those interesting paradoxes. The paradox being that we're all bonded by this very common experience, and yet at the same time, we all have this very unique, even if it's a millionth of a degree different from the person next to us, we have this very, very subtle difference in the way that we perceive and experience ourselves and each other and life. That's why you'd even have two siblings who do not have the same parents, and the siblings can be completely different because the parents they had were different, even though they're the same parents, and the siblings themselves are different. And so even though there can be a lot of similarity in a culture or in a group of people or in a family or in a company, there are going to be these nuanced differences due to the fact that we all have our own experience. I really strongly believe in the idea that we're able to only meet people at the level we currently meet ourselves at. So let's just say you look at these different areas in your life, your health, your finances, your relationship to your age, maybe in the aging process, education, your relationship to intelligence or influence, power, beauty, whatever the subject matter is. We all go through these things. If we sat down at a dining table and we said, okay, well, let's just choose 10 topics and let's talk about how do you feel about your body? How do you feel about your bank account? How do you feel about your relationships? We would all have probably very different relationships to these things. So there can be one area in your life that you feel really good about. Maybe you're quite fit or you've done quite well financially. So you feel quite good about that. And so there's not necessarily a huge amount of maybe inattention or challenge with that. But then maybe in another area of your life, maybe relationships with your children or with your friends or with your partner, that's a little bit more strained and there's a little less muscle around that. So as we start to look at going, well, our ability to then influence or help someone through a similar situation is going to be governed by that. So what do I mean? Well, if you've done quite well financially and someone comes up to you for financial advice and you have a relatively calm, neutral, economist view of money and you've done well for yourself and you're able to advise, you may be calmer and offer more rational advice than, let's just say, they came to you for marriage advice and you've just had a big fight on the way to the dinner with your partner and bloody men this, bloody women that, etc., etc. So as a result, your ability to advise, your ability to help, your ability to influence, your ability to interrupt this person is ultimately going to be governed by your own relationship to that particular subject. So this is where you can have a coach or a therapist or a doctor or a friend who may be wonderful in offering advice in a particular area of their life, but you may not take their advice in another area of their life. And we're all like that. I definitely have areas like that, and as I'm sure you do too. So a big part of the opportunity for this work is then looking at, well, what areas of our life is there still a lot of conflict? What areas of our life is there still some sort of retention, or is there like a limit to where we're able to meet ourselves? So for instance, if we have a lot of guilt and shame around a certain area, maybe it's around, let's just say money. Let's just say all of our friends have done well, we haven't done well. We feel a little bit embarrassed by that. We feel insecure about that. So that insecurity might have some guilt, might have some shame powered by it. And as a result, that might create some rules around money. That might create some beliefs about self and not only our capacity to make money, but spend money, what it must be like to have money, people who have money, what they're like. At the end of the day, everybody knows. And we start creating these rules around money. So let's just say now we go out and we start dating, or we go make friends, or we meet people our own age, or we're at work and someone's at work and they're talking about this new thing that they've just bought. Our relationship to money in that particular situation is going to show up. And it's going to affect our ability to influence that person, to be friends with that person, to interrupt that person in whatever it might be. It's also going to affect our ability to be interrupted by them. And so this is why I think this self-deception is quite interesting, because we wish to go out into the world and be powerful. We want to lead. We want to inspire. We want to coach. We want to help. I love that. I really do. And we're only going to be able to help people to the levels that we're able to help ourselves. If we have a negative relationship towards ourselves around money, that is going to show up in the help that we give. That's going to show up in the way that we lead. It's going to show up in the way we collaborate, in the way we support, the way we love, the way we do anything. So the opportunity for self-deception, and why I like interrupting self-deception, is that I believe it starts with self. It doesn't have to necessarily end with self, but it starts with self. It starts with your ability to look yourself in the mirror and interrupt your own bullshit. To tell the truth to yourself, not to impress anybody, not to try to look good or avoid looking bad, but to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, okay, so what's the truth here about me and what's really going on for me? I believe our ability to see ourselves fully, to love ourselves fully, to forgive ourselves, to be able to interrupt ourselves when we have so many reasons not to. I mean, if you think about the reasons why we wouldn't want to be interrupted, the inconvenience, the embarrassment, the accountability, what we might have to be responsible for, what we might actually have to deal with. Sometimes I get it. Like, avoidance is awesome, because then you don't have to deal with the thing, until of course you do have to deal with the thing. And usually by the time you have to deal with it, it's way worse. And now you can be anywhere on the spectrum, from a complete victim about it to like, oh yeah, fair enough, I did that and this is my penance. But again, even inside of that experience, is that disempowering for you? And is that sort of like, oh, well, that's what you get? Or is there some loving ownership of that, which is like, okay, cool, that's the consequence of that particular choice I made. I got all the benefit of this early on, and now I'm getting the bill later on in life. So our ability to interrupt our own self-deception means we get to make better choices. We may make the better choice in the moment, knowing that, well, not only am I going to get a benefit maybe in the short term and the long term, there's also going to be a cost. And really it's about making the best deal for myself, of saying, is that a deal that I'm really happy to make for me? So interrupting self-deception means that we're able to interrupt that part of us that tries to ignore the red flags, play down the actual cost of certain things, even though the whole of us knows that there is a giant cost. This idea of trying to buy yourself off or trying to trick yourself into pretending something's going to be better than it's not. And then ultimately when it ends up that way, you sort of think, oh, I did know this and I chose to ignore it anyway. Why did I do that? That process is interesting to me, because I think self-deception is effectively what erodes then our self-trust. It's a form of self-betrayal. And as we go out into the world and we stop listening to ourselves and we stop trusting ourselves and we place all that trust in other people, in other things, at some particular point, when you think about the work of, even Bronnie Ware, 5 Regrets of the Dying, and all the literature that's out there around what it means to have self-esteem, it's that ability to like yourself, trust yourself, forgive yourself, love yourself, not in the vain narcissistic self-care, spend all day at the day spa type self-love. I'm talking genuine self-love, that you can tell yourself the truth, that you won't self-deceive because it may reveal a very uncomfortable truth that you are unable and unwilling to face, even though you will have to face it at some particular point. You will not get away from the consequences. Our ability to interrupt ourselves means we make better choices. It means that we can be more proactive. We have more control in our life. We can take ownership of those choices. And if and when those consequences arise, not only are they not as surprising, but they're also not as disempowering. So when I think about boundaries in my life, I think they're very, very important. But I will also say that boundaries, in my view, are a tool, and they are a pathway. They are a transitionary tool. So I would put boundaries up there with, say, opioids or antibiotics, or let's just say even nicotine gum. Now, what do I mean by this? If you are addicted to smoking, if you've just come out of traumatic surgery, if you have caught an infection, okay, you need help. If you have spent your life people pleasing, if you've degraded and let yourself erode your own sense of self so much so that you don't really know where you are and other people in life is, and where it stops and starts, and you find yourself losing yourself in the process, I think boundaries are incredibly useful. Just like I think taking some opioids and some morphine or whatever it is after having surgery is incredibly useful. However, none of these things were intended to become a lifestyle. There is a difference between use and abuse. One of the challenges we have with the pain meds, with the antibiotics, with the nicotine gum, with gout pills and all this sort of medications that we've got, is it now creates this idea in our mind that we can now abuse ourselves, and we have these miracle drugs that will somehow make it all better and fix all the problems we've created for ourselves. I think boundaries can be the same way. If used well, boundaries can help us reestablish a sense of self, help us reestablish our self-esteem, some self-confidence, learn to trust ourselves again, trust our word, trust ourselves. And yet, they can put up walls. They can cut people off. They can prevent us from doing certain things, which is a huge part of teaching us self-confidence, self-esteem, and actually growing, is to find ourselves in uncomfortable situations and not just, ripping open the pill packet and swallowing some boundary pills, but actually noticing that, well, yes, even though a boundary was crossed or whatever the situation, I was okay. I didn't default to my old feelings, my old thought patterns, my old behaviors. Now, I also take a context that boundaries are not for other people. Your boundaries are for you. They're not for other people to respect. They're for you to respect, because they're your boundaries. And boundaries aren't necessarily, don't you do this, you're not allowed to do that, you're disrespecting me. Boundaries are more agreements that one would make to themselves. So a conversation I had the other day was, what is the difference between my principles and my boundaries? So I have a principle of radical self-honesty. Radical self-honesty in myself, radical self-honesty in others, the friendships that I keep, the clients that I work with, the people I interact with. I am radically self-honest, and I look for radical self-honesty in others. Now, I also expect that I also can lie. Other people are absolutely capable of lying, and they do, and I'm going to come up against lying. So principally, I can be driven by an idea of who I choose to be, and the way I choose to show up in the world is to practice radical self-honesty. And I might not always do it. I might get afraid sometimes and tell a white lie or whatever it might be. But overall, my principle is to be that way. My boundary might look like I don't tolerate liars. If you're going to lie to me, you're dead. If you're going to lie to me, I can't work with you. If you're going to lie to me, I can't date you. Whatever it might be. That's a boundary for me. Now, if you really get into the weeds of that, people might say, well, that's a really great boundary to have. That stops the liars. But here's the deal. What do you do when people lie to you? What do I do when I lie to me? When I'm the one crossing my own boundary. So if I create some rule of a boundary that this is where you basically throw people off the castle wall and you close everybody out and you cancel them and they're toxic, etc., you end up just sort of building yourself into this sort of castle with the moats around you. And what do you do when the person inside the castle is also now lying? As I dug a little deeper into my boundaries, I realized that, well, why am I so afraid of lying? And why am I so afraid of liars? I would sit there and notice that lying scares me. And liars scare me because if they're willing to lie to themselves, they'll absolutely lie to me. And the things they might lie to me about, it could be out of self-preservation, it could be out of manipulation, out of greed, it could be whatever the motive is. That lie may hurt me. It may cost me money, it may cost me opportunity. I might, invest my time, energy, and trust and find that it was all fake or whatever it might be. So lying can obviously be very, very nuanced. And it also means I'm always on the hunt looking for liars, which can be exhausting unto itself. Now, principally, I wish to be radically self-honest. Boundary-wise, I'm saying, well, I don't want to tolerate liars. And yet I find myself in this paradox, which is what happens when I lie. What happens if someone I really love, may lie to me? Now what? Are they dead to me? And do I not drop my standards for them? Or is that not really a standard, but is that some sort of boundary that I'm really using now as a crutch to protect myself from the fear of being lied to? The reason why this is important is if I never address my fear of being lied to, I never get any stronger about it. I never develop my own sense of self and wherewithal to be able to be lied to and not come undone. And this is where I think a lot of boundaries are starting to become abused by people. It's not that people abusing that are bad people. They're not doing it because they're stupid. They're doing it because, in a way, it provides a sense of comfort that they may have never had before, but just like alcohol, just like porn, just like validation, just like whatever it might be, sometimes too much of something. So when I think about these boundaries and the idea of, well, what would it look like to not have that boundary, I'd first have to understand why that boundary is in place. Radically, self-honest, I would say I have that boundary because I'm afraid that I'm not going to survive emotionally when I'm lied to, particularly if I really liked and trust this person and I became invested in them and then they lied to me. I don't know how to survive that emotionally. Now, I can get into all the trauma work and childhood work around why and whatever. And look, it's certainly useful to a degree, but it's not necessary, right? It's about being able to tell the truth that there is a fear there. There is something there. And so rather than actually face the fear of my own not enoughness and being lied to, where boundaries can sometimes become tricky is we go, well, the best thing to do is just don't tolerate that. Just don't put up with it. And then therefore you won't have to deal with it. And unfortunately, this just doesn't work that way. You're going to come up against it. You're going to come against it in yourself and others, people you love, people you hate, because lying is a part of life. Self-deception is a part of life. So if you're going out into the world and you're wanting to interrupt other people, you want to be a counselor, a leader, a parent, a friend, and you want to go and truly cause transformation in another person's life, you're going to come up against lies. You're going to come up against self-deception. So you can imagine for someone like me whose entire brand is around interrupting self-deception, and I have a principle of radical self-honesty, and yet paradoxically at the same time, if I have this very rigid boundary around not dealing with liars, well, that's going to put me in a bit of a sticky situation because I'm not going to really be able to move. And I'm always going to bang up against this challenge. And then when it does, I'm going to get triggered. I'm going to get upset. I'll probably say or do things that are based on self-preservation rather than actually being able to help that person navigate their own self-deception. When I'm wanting to help other leaders and I'm wanting to help other people, it's often understanding these little subversive patterns that we all have where the very thing that we're fueled by, the very thing that we wish to go and create and change in the world can sometimes be the very anchor that we've got tied around our own ankles and our own inability to be able to recognize it and see that in the moment. I like being able to help people identify what that is and then create enough space to decide, well, do you want to keep doing that? And there was space for me in my life created around, okay, well, what would it look like? Would you have to give up your fear of lying so that you could go and create this community and go provide this work to the world? Or do you have to give up on creating that contribution to the world and go do something else if you wish to hold on to the fear of lying? So when I look at this idea of boundaries, I think boundaries are incredibly useful. And yet at some point, for me to interrupt, for me to be influential, for me to truly help people, well, I'm going to have to enter this domain that I'm also scared of. And being scared of that domain means I'm going to have to face myself in the mirror. I'm going to have to face my own fears and insecurities around what it means to be lied to, whether it's by me or by another person. And are there other ways of navigating and feeling my way through that situation and not necessarily just jumping to some sort of self-preserving behavior, which ironically then may undo all the good work I've done to that with that person to that date. As counterintuitive as it sounds, I think it's wonderful that people are installing boundaries. That is like getting on the nicotine patches. That's like taking the pain meds. That's taking the antibiotics, which is putting you on a path to healing. But I must stress, I really do strongly believe that this is not designed to be a lifestyle. Boundaries are not designed to be a thing now where you just keep people out for the rest of your life. What they're intended to do is give you enough time and space to develop yourself emotionally, physically, so that when you come up against these things and you've got some other strategies and you've got a healthier relationship to yourself, so that when you get lied to, you may actually even have compassion for that person rather than fear of them. You may have compassion of going, wow, I wonder what's going on for this person that they feel like they need to lie. But we're not going to be able to get to that space if we ourselves are still afraid of the lie and we're doing everything we can to keep people out. So a counterintuitive part of the work that I do for people is to understand what these boundaries are that they've created and start to model what life might look like after the boundaries. What might life look like after the pain meds? What might life look like after the antibiotics, after the nicotine gum? As a transitionary thing, incredibly useful. But as a long-time lifestyle thing, could actually be very, very harmful. And the solution can actually become the new problem. Let's just say naturally arising consequences that come from an unexamined internal dialogue. When we think about the fact that we're unable to interrupt ourselves, we're unable to actually understand what's really going on for us. Instead, we just use these sort of labels and we use these drugs and we use these concepts to sort of protect us as armor from each other. Well, it's not surprising that if we all sort of suit up with armors and swords and shields that, we're all going to find each other threatening. So if you're wanting to be a better leader, if you want to be a better influencer, if you want to be a better coach, partner, friend, person, neighbor, it doesn't really matter. We're all trying to influence ourselves and each other. I really think this relationship to being able to first interrupt your own self-deception means that when you find a loving relationship with yourself and your own lying and your own distortions and your own fears, well, now you're able to meet people in theirs. When you have a relationship and a clear understanding of, oh yeah, I lie when I get scared, you may now actually have empathetic compassion for a person who's also lying rather than a judgment and a criticism of them. So this work is textured, it's nuanced, but I really strongly believe that we can only meet people at the level we can currently meet ourselves. I get it, like this stuff, not everyone's ready for it. It's confronting. It can be scary. You may discover some things about yourself that's just not how you want to be seen. That's not how you wish to be seen. That's not how you think you are, and yet you might be. And yet it's not until we start having that loving look in the mirror and we stay looking in the mirror when it's uncomfortable. We don't shy away because the reflection is unflattering. When we're able to stay and be with that and we learn to develop some love and appreciation for ourselves, one of the craziest things happens is we start to recognize our reflection in other people, and then we start to see them struggling with their own reflection. And it's our practice and our ability to look inside ourselves with love that becomes the work. It's us demonstrating that love for self and forgiveness for self, being able to look in the mirror and tell the whole truth, that actually helps people look in their own mirror and do the same. It's not more information. It's not another book. It's not another framework. It's going to be the embodiment of your own practice, being a demonstration for other people to witness and for them to model off. So self-deception, it's crazy when you start to think about it. And while I understand, there is a lot of stuff being done around shadow work, and there's a lot of stuff done around trauma and therapy, and I think it's tremendously wonderful. It's also very important to recognize where those things can also become crutches rather than aids to help us heal, to be able to move on to a life without trauma, without identity, without labels, without the need for boundaries to protect ourselves from ourselves. Something to think about.